Hey everyone, today I am creating 29 cards using an incomplete paper pad from Honeybee Stamps. This one is called Vitamin C, and I have another project where I use part of this paper pad on my channel. The sketch I'm using is the SheetLoad card sketch from March 2022, and I, along with some of the creative team, are reusing this one while it is temporarily removed from the vault. I will put links below to a playlist where you can check out everybody's videos and also to where you can get your hands on the sketch itself. So what I'm doing at the moment is I'm just running through and pulling out all of the sheets of paper. This is a partially used pad, so for some of them I have two pieces that are the same, and for some of them there is only one piece of the pattern paper left. I'm actually using 6 by 8.5 inch paper today, so I'm working out here how to create all of the 3 pieces that I need from the pattern paper if I cut down as many as I can from each sheet of paper. The reason that I do this is I love mass producing cards, and if I do just a little bit of planning to work out how many can I get of piece A, B and C out of a sheet of paper, I can then multiply those out and figure out how many cards I can make with what I have left. You'll notice that I actually come up with a number here of 27 cards. And what I've done deliberately is I've worked out how many sheets I have available, and then I've made sure that I leave 2 sheets spare so that I can cut it down to be whatever pieces I need to finish off the last few cards. So a couple of these say 27 and one says 24. So it looks like I need a few of piece C to be able to finish that off. Now I'll move down to cutting down the pieces of pattern paper. I did cut it out of the video, but I did sit there for a bit and try and work out which are the pieces of pattern paper that are best suited to the smaller piece for the front of the design and which ones are better off for the bigger piece. Now, generally what I've done is I've used the sort of darker colours or the ones that I think could match with many of the other pattern papers as the smaller piece at the bottom. And the reason that I did this is because obviously when you cut a piece of paper down, you get more pieces out of the smallest element than you do when you're cutting out the biggest element. And so I thought it'd be really important to pick the pattern papers that are going to go on a lot more of the cards a little bit more carefully. Chopping these down is really easy. I'm just cutting off the edge and then chopping them down into 2 pieces. This is for the bigger piece in the middle of the card. And then I am chopping down the pieces that are for the 5.5 inches by 1 inch. And these are the pieces that go on the outside. Now, when I create most of my cards, I traditionally have a 1/4 inch border all the way around the edge, but this sketch doesn't really allow for that. It goes all from the top to the bottom of the card and gives full coverage. So a bit of an unusual look or different design for me when creating this project. It was really fun, but I will admit that when I was cutting down these 1 inch strips, a couple of times I cut them to 5.25 instead of 5.5, and so I did need to dip into another pattern paper pack where I had some spare sheets in similar tones to be able to make up the difference. And quite coincidentally, these are the pieces that I'm using here. I think they're from Honeybee, but I think this is called Harvest something. I'll look it up and I'll put a link below along with the other papers and items that I've used today, just in case you are trying to track any of them down. But this little checkered paper in particular, I think is absolutely gorgeous. And because of the orange, grey and kind of mint colour, it works perfectly with the Vitamin C collection. So I didn't have any trouble finding some spare papers that could help me complete as many cards as possible today, which was really, really fun. When I was cutting the papers down, I was leaving all of the spare cut-off sections off to the side of my desk. Most of them are either 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch wide, and in different circumstances, they're either 6 inches long or sometimes they're the 8.5 inches long. And so you'll see what I do with those in a moment when we get to one of the future stages. Now again, as a bulk card maker, I attached all of the 1 inch strips to the edge of my A2 card bases. So they are 5.5 by 4.25 inches. And now what I've done is gone through and I've added the little edge pieces so that they match and they're from the same paper onto the card bases, ready to put the different pattern paper topper pieces. I don't know what else to call them. The element that goes on top in the middle. And then I'm trying to make sure that they match up with whatever I put with the last couple of these pieces of pattern paper. So I guess my strategy was do as many as I could, and for the last few, just double check which would match best with the papers. Now I've chopped up the cardboard on the front and the back of the paper pack to put in the middle of this card sketch, just to lift up that middle element a little bit so that it doesn't dip. I ended up doing that on about 8 or 10 cards, and then I decided, you know what, I think the stiff cardstock of the white backing panel that's going to go on top is probably enough for it not to dip down. So I skipped this step, and honestly, I can't tell the difference. So if you really want them to be nice and flat, then you could do the layer underneath, but if not, it works absolutely perfectly without it. And if I use this sketch again, I won't bother putting anything under the middle. Now, my liquid glue was absolutely my best friend for this card sketch. I used it to attach every element to the paper this time, and especially when I want something to stick really, really well in the middle, and I want it to go all the way to the edge so I don't have any curled up pieces of paper or cardstock. And so this, I've just been really careful when applying the glue to go all the way. Now, in terms of the sentiment for this card sketch, there was a couple of ways that I could go. I could either put it on a thin strip, or I could make the sentiment be the feature. And because I traditionally do thin, pretty small sentiments on my cards, I thought this time I will use this pack from Simon Says Stamp. I am not sure if this is still available, but it is from some years ago, but it really does create these gorgeous little hexagons. And so I'm using my usual trick of I've cut out a whole ton of blanks in leftover cardstock. So you can see on my desk there's a bunch of hexagons there on the left. And then I've put the stamps onto my MISTI, stamped it down once, and then when I've gone and cut those out very, very carefully, I can now put in my blanks and then stamp all of the sentiments and know that they are perfectly lined up. I do have other videos on my channel that explain how to do this, but it is pretty straightforward, and for me, it's a game changer. If I end up sitting there and having to attach the hexagon die very carefully to 40 different hexagon stamps, then I think that just takes forever. So this is way, way quicker. And you do need to be a little bit careful when you're putting in the hexagons, because the cardstock I'm using here for the template is not very thick. But if I line them up really nicely, then I honestly get a great stamp each time. So highly recommend using this strategy depending on what you are using for your card project. If you don't create as many cards as I tend to, then I still think it's great having extra sentiments in your stash, because if you're trying to make some cards and you don't have a lot of time, it's good to have some of those just popped away somewhere in a container where you can add them to a card design without having to get all of your supplies out and really work through a project from scratch. Now that I have all my sentiments sorted out and I have all of my little leftover bits of, most of them are about 1/2 inch wide, scraps from the pattern paper, I'm now just figuring out how to line them up so that I have that little bit of offset of colour and a bit of an offset in white, which is pretty true to the card sketch itself. So for each of these, I just worked through and tried to find what would be the pattern paper that would provide a bit of a contrast, but would match whatever I had as part of the design itself. Now, you'll notice that I actually have the cards all sitting in order. So I did several that were the same pattern paper, maybe 3 or 4 each time, but there's a whole series that are in kind of teal or pool tones, and then there's a bunch that are in green, and there's a bunch that are in kind of more like the browns and craft tones. So when I was working through, I did not just put, a random piece of craft on the pool tones style of card. I tried to make it a pattern paper that I had not used yet, and I tried to line it up in a way that meant it was complementary to what was already part of the card design. The thing I will say is when I got to this step, I was using both sides of the pattern paper, which means it is handy when you've got a double-sided paper pad. So that gave me lots of extra choices for when I was working through this step of the process. And you can see here, that's a little bit of a 1/4 inch strip. I had those for some reason on my desk. I must have done a miscut, or I'm not exactly sure, but it just meant I added 3 elements to this card, and it looks a little bit different to the others, but no less, it's from the same card design, and they do look like they could go together in a card kit. The next thing that I did was, well, I ran out of sentiments. So I tuck into some of the spares I had from previous projects, which you'll see me do a lot. And these ones, I have these gorgeous little bird stamps from one of the other SheetLoads, I believe, and I'll put a link to that below also. And so I'm using exactly the same strategy here, putting down a piece of pattern paper, one of the die cuts in white, and then adding a feature element with the sentiment on the left-hand side of the card. And these bird style sentiments were absolutely perfect. Now, not all of them had coloured stamping on the bird. Some of them were just black and white. Not all of them actually had the black matting layer. And I just decided that I was going to use what I had without making any adjustments. So you can see for this one, there's no matting layer, but it was stamped with some green ink, and it matched absolutely perfectly with that card that had almost been finished except for the feature element. So I'm just going to finish these up, and there was something very, very satisfying about working through this process and having all of these cards at the end. Now you'll see in the middle of my screen that I actually have the ends of some of the banner sentiments that I had chopped, and I did add those to the top right of the cards as a little banner feature, and I did that after I'd finished recording, so you will see that in the thumbnail, but you will not see me creating those today. I have put another video here that I think you might enjoy. Have a great day.